Hi, I'm Psipher. You probably saw my last lecture on cognitive behavioral therapy and stoicism for furries and everyone else. But today I would like to work on some supplementary material that goes along with that lecture that I believe would be very helpful for people that are dealing with anxiety and depression. This talk is specifically about Viktor E. Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl was an Austrian psychotherapist who had survived multiple Nazi concentration camps that was working on a particular form of therapy to help people become more resistant to suffering in general, and his survival in the camps helped inform his philosophy and therapy in general. And a lot of it is very similar to Stoicism, surprisingly, but with a couple of different emphases, specifically on developing personal meaning for oneself to make one resilient towards suffering, while Stoicism was more about understanding the nature of suffering and understanding the nature of how our perceptions trick us into pain. Not necessarily for everything, but it's a pretty good a pretty good coping strategy overall. So for Frankl, though, he wants us to look at life as a quest for meaning, where meaning can be found in doing purposeful work, giving love to another human being, experiencing the transcendent or something that feels greater than oneself, and developing an adaptable and courageous attitude towards unavoidable suffering. And specifically when it comes to finding meaning via love for another person, Frankl specifically wants us to understand it is about trying to actualize the untapped potential within another person, to not only love them for who they are, but to love them for who they can become. And when it comes specifically to dealing with uncontrollable suffering, suffering that you cannot avoid, that meaning can be derived specifically from how we can control our attitude towards those circumstances. The logotherapy that Frankl had developed, though, is about orienting a person towards finding that personal meaning. And when we're trying to find it, we may experience something called existential frustration, which is when we're desiring to find that meaning, but we may not necessarily come upon it. It may not dawn upon us, but it's this task of seeking it, essentially, and wanting it and desiring it, even if we're not fully conscious of it. And people can genuinely suffer without this meaning. Even if there's no other mental illness or neuroses present, people can genuinely feel pain and suffering and, a sense of emptiness when they don't have this sense of meaning. But what we need to be very clear on here is that this meaning, this personal life meaning, is not an answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? That's too broadly philosophical for what Frankl is trying to aim for here. But rather, he wants us to think of it as it is something that we have freely chosen, a freely chosen goal specific to our given life or to any other person's life. And this freedom to choose one's meaning, this goal essentially, or values if you want to put it that way as well, must be united with responsibility to something or to someone out in the world that depends on our existence or creativity. Because if you do not include that responsibility with that freedom, then those free actions appear arbitrary. They start to appear purposeless, which makes some very good general sense. But again, it's keeping in mind to have free choice, freedom only makes sense in the context of also having responsibility for your actions towards other people, and also perhaps to yourself as well. And it's only after that one has found this personal meaning that self-transcendence can be obtained. Specifically here, what I mean by self-transcendence, it is about fulfilling your responsibilities within the world and living for more than just yourself. It's going beyond yourself. You're working and doing something for others or for a greater good, leaving a legacy in a sense. But once you have obtained this self-transcendence, then self-actualization and happiness will be more likely to follow from that self-transcendence. Happiness in itself cannot be obtained as a goal, as I had mentioned from the previous lecture, but it is derived as a byproduct of contributing to a cause greater than oneself, again, through that self-transcendence. And by working towards fulfilling values rather than goals, and striving towards being genuine or authentic, guided by one's chosen meaning. But Frankl gives us a very huge warning here. We are now currently living in a world where this personal meaning is very minimally present. Because as our society has become more civilized and secular over the past few centuries, we are much less bound to instinct and tradition to give us some sense of meaning to guide us in our lives. And this leaves us to a predisposition to fall prey to conformity or to authoritarianism, which essentially is just saying that we become prone to just following orders or allowing people to tell us what to do in order to keep us busy or to keep us distracted, more or less. It fills in the hole of the meaningless. It fills in the hole created by meaninglessness at that point. And as long as that situation exists for people, their circumstances will be permeated with boredom. And with that, people will try compensating for that boredom and lack of meaning by trying to fill it with desires for power or pleasure. Again, these other types of distractions. Most of us are probably familiar with this as people who are trying to chase after excessive wealth, social status, or, escapism into hedonistic behavior. Addictions would probably be the most common examples. But if you're not aware of the term, Frankl coined the term existential vacuum, which is exactly what we're talking about here. That hole caused by a lack of personal meaning is the infamous existential vacuum. And if you leave that existential vacuum intact, life is going to be a lot more difficult for you in general. Specifically, Frankl proposed that it becomes a lot easier for different types of neuroses and mental problems to arise. Again, addictions are the most common example that I can think of here. But what will happen is that if you don't have some core personal meaning within you, you become a lot less resilient towards a lot of neurotic phenomena like depression or anxiety, where without that meaning, you don't have a buffer. You essentially have no shield to withstand the brunt force of those types of problems coming towards you. And because of that, you're probably more likely to relapse into other types of problems if you don't have that inner strength or that inner core. So it's usually proposed that when dealing with, say, a psychotherapeutic treatment, yes, you should still have like the standard like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior therapy, ACT therapy, whatever you choose. But if you don't have this inner core personal meaning, that extra therapy, the CBT, the DBT, ACT, whatever, is not going to be as effective. Again, if you don't have that inner core. Now, also beyond that, though, Frankl believed that if that existential vacuum also remains in place, there's also a much stronger chance for people to then fall prey to nihilism, depression, aggression, addiction, again. But in particular, one of the things he found very concerning was specifically nihilism, especially as it was emerging in the last century. To him, nihilism encourages people to hold the view that human behavior is purely determined by materialistic laws, but that are everything that we do is by fate. It's determined. We're all automatons ruled by the laws of biology, physics, psychology, what have you. And it also encourages this idea that without some sense of meaning, or again, personal meaning, we start to confuse what is meaningful for what is practical or useful. We start seeing things as we start seeing people as only meaningful to us if they're useful to us in some way. A person's dignity becomes essentially measured by how useful they are in society. That obviously would not be a very fun world to live in, essentially. Now, I'm not saying that all nihilists are going to be like that. I know there's nuance. But Frankl wanted to give the warning of there may be a predisposition for people to fall into certain habitual patterns of thought that may be caused by nihilism, which in turn is partly caused by the existential vacuum that people may be experiencing. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people have experienced this very intuitively, at least from what I'm describing. But this is probably one of the first bits of text that arose in the last century that really faced this idea head on and really clarified it in general. Now, in the text, he gives a couple different questions, or at least I've adapted some thought-provoking ideas from the text that I want to be able to ask you folks. You can respond in the comments if you wish, but these are mostly just personal questions for you. You can just take them as food for thought, something to help you just self-reflect. Some of these might be very simple to you. For other people, they just don't think about these things that much, and, sometimes this actually does help them quite a bit. Sometimes we just have to be reminded of these types of things.